How long will you
As long as you want.
tape it?
The tape is an hour.
Oh, Lord.
Ready?
Yep.
This is an interview with Daniel Blacksmith. Home interview, Cooperstown, New York. It is the 17th of May, 2004, approximately 11 a.m. Interviewers are Wayne Clark and Mike Grussage. Could you give me your full name, date of birth, and place of birth, please?
Daniel A. Blacksmith. I was born in Middletown, New Jersey, August 25th, 1925.
Okay, what was your educational background prior to entering service?
High school, graduated in 1942, and that was it because I knew I was going to go into service, so I joined the Navy in August of 43.
Okay. Do you remember where you were and your reaction when you heard about Pearl Harbor? How you heard about it?
Yeah, a friend of mine was very interested in naval ships, a young fellow. We were both 17 years old, I guess. And we made a trip down to Tom's River to see an old sea captain. And while we were there, we learned about the attack on Pearl Harbor. And of course, at that age, it wasn't a very dramatic thing as far as we were concerned. We were very concerned about, what damage that was done and people that were killed over there. But we didn't. When you're 17, the things kind of you don't realize, and immediately, both of us wanted to join the service. And when I first went, I forgot whether I was asked, went to New York City to enlist in the Navy, and I was asked by one of the leaders there if I wanted to join the regular Navy or the reserves, and I said, well, I want to join the regular Navy. I thought reserves meant that you stayed home. I didn't realize that you went right in the Naval Reserve, so I told him the regular Navy, and then he explained to me what it was, and I thought, well, I don't want to stay for 4 years if I don't have to, so I'll join the reserves.
Why did you select the Navy? I know you said you had this friend interested in...
Yeah, I always liked the Navy. Lived on the Jersey Shore. During Depression, I think it was about 1932 or 3, my folks moved we moved in with my grandparents in a little town of Port Monmouth, New Jersey, which was right on the shore. Near Long Branch, a little north of Long Branch, New Jersey. And I spent a lot of time on the beaches and on boats when I was a kid. And just like the Navy.
Where did you go for your basic training?
Newport, Rhode Island.
Okay. Could you tell us about your training, how long you were there, what were some of the things you did that you recall?
Well, there's an awful lot of stories about what happens when you go into a boot camp. Then when I look back on it, I can't believe some of the things that we had to do and what we did and some of the things that happened, but it was only 6 weeks. A lot of discipline, early rising, of course, and just a lot of things that we had to do. We took classes, we took tests, we marched a lot, we went to rifle range, and a lot of things we did that I didn't think pertained to the Navy, really, that I remember.
Did you sleep in bunks or hammocks?
No, we slept in hammocks. And the little trick sometimes that somebody would slice a line, and when the fellow got in his hammock, it collapsed. And when a thing like that happened, the whole company, it only happens once because the whole company had to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning and carry a pail full of water with some clothes in it around the drill field until dawn. That's the punishment. So things like that only happened once. A little which I guess that was an outstanding thing, because I never, that was the first real disciplinary thing that happened to us at boot camp. But other than that, it was just training and marching, and we took their various tests. And when the boot camp was completed, we were told we went to what they call an OGU, an outgoing unit, and there we were assigned to different schools or ships or things like that. And while we were waiting to be sent to these different places, we scrubbed hammocks and sea bags and things like that that came back from being out in the field and out at sea. Sailors that were lost and killed in action, and all of their equipment Navy equipment would come to this outgoing unit, where they were cleaned and scrubbed by us while we waited for these schools to be announced, if we were lucky enough to get to school. And I and two other fellows were supposed to go to the basic engineering school in Dearborn, Michigan. And I can only assume that was operated by the Ford Motor Company. I don't know, but that's what we always surmised. And while we were waiting to be called to go to this school, we were supposed to get 30 days delay in orders and then report to the school. And we waited and waited, the three of us, and kept working, and they kept calling for schools to be gone, and the guys would leave, and it got right down to the last dozen or so, and we were told that the basic engineering school was canceled by the Great Lakes Naval Training Station, had filled their quota, and that we would go to sea. Meanwhile, I told my mother and my father and everything about going to school, and they were quite excited about that, because they didn't want me to go to sea unless I had to. So they said, you three fellows will be assigned to the USS Wasp, which is being built in Quincy, and it'll be floated down to the Boston shipyard, and you'll wait for it at the Fargo building in Boston. So that's what happened. We got, I think we only had 10 or 15 days at home, and then we had to report to the Fargo building in Boston, Massachusetts, and waited for the ship there, and went aboard eventually in November, I think the 9th of 43, and or 7th or 9th, and one of our officers, gunnery officers, was John Roosevelt, Franklin's son, and Eleanor Roosevelt was at the commissioning, and she gave a little talk. And that was it. I was assigned originally I wanted to be a photographer because I'd done that in high school. And I had a little business, photo business of my own, before I went into service. And I was just a seaman, and I asked somebody, I've forgotten now, one of the masters at arms, when I found out what that meant, I asked him if they had a photography shop on the ship, and he said, yes. He said, they do. He said, when I see the photo officer, I'll give him your name. Well, that's the last I thought about that at the Fargo building. And after I got aboard ship, I was assigned quarters up on the forecastle deck, which is just under the flight deck up forward. And got to talking to the different fellows that were there around me. And one of the fellows, when I introduced myself, he said, "Is your name Blacksmith?" I said, "Yes." He said, "They've been calling you on the loudspeaker system." He said, "to report to the photo lab." He said, that they've been calling you now. He said, for a day or two. So I never heard it. So I went down there, and I was asked if I wanted to work in the photo lab. I said, "Oh yeah, definitely." So that's what started me in photography and on the ship. And we had a lot of rated men. We had a chief and one or two first class, and then some third class. And some of them had gone to the photo school in Pensacola, Florida, Naval photo school there. And no one was interested in the motion picture end of the business, and I was, because I was fascinated by equipment, and I volunteered to do all I could with the motion picture cameras. They gave us a couple of Mitchells, which are, in those days, were Hollywood cameras, and with different motors, and there was a lot to it, so they were very heavy equipment. And we decided to mount one on the catwalks up on the flight deck. And then I would man that most of the trip. And one of the most interesting things was on the shakedown cruise. A very sad thing happened. We went out of Norfolk, and our first flight operations, I happened to be on the catwalk with a still camera, a 4x5 speed graphic. And we had a chief warrant officer by the name of Knapp. He was there with me, and he was on an IMO camera, which was a little 35 millimeter camera, handheld one, and a couple of other fellows were there with cameras, photo fellows. And when the planes landed, when a plane landed and picked up a cable, 3 men on each side of the flight deck would run out and unhook that cable. So in a hurry, because the plane had to taxi forward for the next plane to land. And this, of course, was all new to us, really. And I noticed one of the planes landed, 3 men ran out from each side, and they were immediately swept off their feet where the cable had snapped and came back like a whip, and it caught them across the legs. And I jumped up on the flight deck and took a series of photographs of the cable, because everything in those days was espionage, when they were concerned about the Japanese planning bombs and things, much like what's going on today with this terrorism business. And I took pictures of the cable and the end of the cable and where the receiver was, where the wheels wound the cable back in after it was unhooked. And I must have taken probably 5 or 6 different pictures, and I took a couple of pictures of the fellows that were being carried off the flight deck, because they were hurt pretty bad, broken legs and things like that. So I turned around to go back to the catwalk, and I didn't see Officer Knapp, warrant officer. And I looked down on the catwalk, and he was flat on his back, and I could see the dent in his. We had cloth helmets. We didn't have anything to protect your ears in those days, but we had cloth helmets, and I could see the dent in his helmet. So I took a picture of him there. And meanwhile, they got him down to sick bay, but he died. That killed him, and he was the first person killed on the ship. It was a photographer, warrant officer, Knapp. And then that night, in the photo lab, we must have printed 100 or 200 pictures, each of those, of the cable, and the different shots I took of the cable. And they had to go up above to the intelligence office. And it was the photo lab's located in the island structure, and they, being that age and everything, I never thought much about it. And that was the end of it. And then we went on.
Was he hit by a piece of the cable?
He was hit by one of the. There's a heavy cable, and then there's a union where the smaller cable is attached.
Like a turnbuckle.
See, yeah, and that thing was about that big, as I recall. And I don't have any pictures of that, but I'm sure they're in the archives in Washington. And that snapped back, like that, and hit him. And I didn't know that. I was up on the flight deck. Immediately when I saw this happen, I jumped up there, and I didn't even see him get hit. But that was a bad thing, and a sad thing to happen. I mean, he was a married guy, and he had 1 or 2 children. I've forgotten now the details, but then we went on, finally we got demagnetized in Norfolk and went down to Trinidad, and on a shakedown cruise, and had a storm in the Atlantic, and half the crew got sick, and you know, those kind of things. And we came back to Norfolk to have some more work done on the ship, the guns or something, I don't know what it was, radar I guess it was. And then we went down through the canal, and another accident happened on the way to San Diego. The canal was an exciting trip. We only had about an inch on each side of the ship to get through the canal. That's how tight it was. In fact, it scraped the sides of the canal. Each one of those carriers, those Essex class carriers, they had to build them that way because today they're not concerned about the canal, but in those days they had to get through the canal, Panama Canal, and that's as wide as they could make the ship so that it would fit through there. That was quite interesting to see to happen. And we got to San Diego, and some fella backed into a propeller on the deck, and you want to. It's not a funny story, but I mean I'll never forget it. We kept our film in a cold storage room down in the area of the ship where they kept a lot of foodstuffs. But they had one little section that was set aside way down in the hull for film to keep it cold and preserve it. And I went down there to get some 35mm film for the Mitchell camera. And the guy that was hit by the propeller was in there with a tag on his toe. And I had to walk in sideways because it wasn't very big to get the film. And that's the thing I never forgot about that trip to San Diego. And from San Diego, we went out to Wake and out. And we hit most of the islands, I guess. I've got a picture here.
Did anyone show you how to use the cameras, or were you?
No, and it's amazing, but all the photographers we had aboard that ship in the photo lab, there wasn't a one that wanted anything to do with a motion picture camera.
Mm-hmm.
And it had to be, I had to figure everything out myself. And of course, the other fellows helped. We thought, well, maybe this is that, maybe this is that, and so forth. So we put it all together. But once you do it, you don't forget it. And we had deep tanks on the ship. In one of the compartments on the photo lab, we had what they call deep tanks and wooden racks. And those wooden racks would accept about 100 feet of 35mm film. In the dark, you'd wind this film on. It had little pins on it, and it was like a big revolving rack. It had a deal like this. It would turn, and you'd put this film on there.
Oh, were you
When
shooting?
you had the film all attached, you'd take it out and get up on a little landing and put it in this deep tank of developer.
Were you shooting color film or strictly black and white?
Black and white, yeah. We had some color, but it was not. We used, most of it was 16mm. But we shot very little color film. But these racks then would be put in the developer, just like you develop a piece of film in a tray in those days, and then go in, wash it, and put it in the fixer. And we did have 1 or 2 printers, Bell and Howell printers, I think they were. And when we developed, we had the negative, and then we had film to positive film, and we'd load these printers up and print the film that way. But we didn't do an awful lot of that. We sent a lot of it exposed negative. I can't remember what we did with it really. But I see some of the stuff that we shot every once in a while on Victory at Sea. there's one in particular where there's a plane on fire that lands just off near the flight deck. And we had a lot of things a lot of good, interesting pictures like that. And one of the still pictures that I took down in the fantail was a picture of a Japanese, I think it was a Judy. I've got a picture of it here that we hit that had dropped a bomb on the Hornet, the USS Hornet, but it missed. And as it flew over near us, our gunners got it, and there's a big trail of fire and smoke. And that's one of the pictures that you see always in the pictorial histories of World War II. And it's quite a popular picture. I have a couple of those there with me. But I don't know, it reminds me of, I mean, it's just, you can go days and days out there in the heat sometimes, and sometimes it's cold, it depends on where you are. And you sleep up top on the deck and use your helmet for a pillow because it's so hot in the compartments, and it's just, and then all of a sudden you go to general quarters and there's a lot of activity. All the guns firing, 5-inch guns, 40mm guns, and 20mm guns. And a lot of times you can't see even what they're firing at, and sometimes at night they fire. They would fire, and well, I don't know. We attacked all of the islands. We went down to as I told you before, when we crossed the international date line, we had what they call the polywog initiation. We were all shellbacks, and which means that you've never been across the international date line. And when you cross the international date line, it's a tradition in the Navy. Any shellback has to be, I may even have it backwards by now, has to be initiated. And they dreamed up all types of things to be initiated. They built a wooden stand, like a gallows up on the flight deck, and then you'd go up on there and you'd sit down and they'd shave your head, and then they'd tip you over into a big tank of water, and the next thing you had to go through a target sleeve full of garbage while these guys wrapped you with a rubber hose. And some of the fellas were hurt, they were injured. And that's when Admiral McCain came on the loudspeaker system, and he told them to take it easy. and I'd already been through, I was one of the early ones through there. And being a photographer, there were 3,000 men on that ship, and every one of them wanted pictures to send home. And, how can you possibly do a thing like that? Not permitted to do it anyhow. So you had to refuse all those requests, and they recognized you there's only 8 of us, and these guys, these shellbacks, they would recognize us and really give us the business going through there, but obviously made it okay. But and then when I got myself settled and got my clothes put back on and changed and so forth, well, I took a lot of pictures because this went on for almost the whole day when we were down that area crossing that line. Because there's only about a third of the ship that were, I guess the guys that had been across the date line before were called shellbacks. We were the polywogs. And there weren't that many shellbacks aboard, so it took a long time to initiate the polywogs.
Do you still have your card?
Pardon?
Do you still have your card?
Yeah, so you bet I have it. And I also have a certificate downstairs in my lab down there. But then we were on our way to the Admiralty Islands. And I remember down in Manus, we were allowed to go off the side and swim. until we got a notice that the sharks were around, so we had to get back out of the water in a hurry. We used to go down on it. There's a deck edge elevator on the carrier, and they would drop that down because the flight deck was about 73 feet off the water. So you couldn't very well dive off of that, but when they put the deck edge elevator down, then you could dive off of that. And they had ladders up down there for us. I only got to swim a couple times. I never set foot on ground almost 2 years, except for one time they permitted the crew to go on a little Mog Island, it was called. And we got 3 cans of brown beer, 3 cans of beer, but they were OD color, Army color, and they weren't really cold, and it was terrible stuff. So I drank one and gave the other 2 away. And some guys had 3 or 4 or 5 cans of that stuff. How they could drink it, I don't know, but it was terrible. And there was a couple of natives there and a couple of little straw houses, and I've got it reminded me of Trinidad, where we were there one time, but on the shakedown cruise. And then we kept attacking all the different islands that had to be invaded and taken over, and I guess one of the big ones was Okinawa. And it was off of Okinawa where we got hit bad. We got hit with we weren't even the general quarters, and it was a plane that was way up above the ship, and the radar can't pick it up when it's directly above the ship. And it dove down and dropped a 500-pound armor-piercing bomb that went through the flight deck down and exploded in the galley. And they were getting ready for morning breakfast, And this thing exploded down there, and it killed about 200 and some guys. And I've got pictures. I've got some of the only pictures that were taken of that damage. It blew the deck down into the engine room, one of the engine rooms, and the hangar deck caught fire, and there's burned up some planes. So it had an awful mess there. And the ship was damaged so badly that we had to come back to Pearl Harbor, and it was discovered there that they couldn't repair it there, so we had to come back to Bremerton near Seattle, Bremerton, Washington, and for repairs. And then we were each given, I forget now, I think 30 or 40 days leave to come home. And then we had to get right back to the ship, because how they ever repaired that ship in less than 2 months, I'll never know, but they did. And a whole lot of funny things happened. I remember we called I forget what they called the civilians that worked on the ships, these guys that did marvelous things at putting the ship back together, but they couldn't get any cigarettes. And I know that's a no-no today, but I'll tell you then, we never had enough money to go on leave because we only got $50 a month or $60 a month, something like that. But we'd sell those cigarettes we'd get them in the sick bay for a nickel a pack. What's it, 50 cents a carton, I guess it was. And we had so many cigarettes on that ship that they would get moldy, and we'd have to throw them over the side. I say we, the different crews that they put to work on it. Photographers got away with a lot. We didn't have to do anything like that. But they, hundreds of big cases of cigarettes they'd throw over the side because they were all moldy. But anyhow, when we got into Bremerton there, these fellas they gave us $10 a carton. Well, that was a lot of money, particularly when they only cost us 50 cents. And it wasn't allowed, of course, but everybody did it. And particularly the guys that didn't smoke. I smoked maybe a pack a week. That's about all I could take because I always had the smoking lamp out. Anytime the ammunition, they were loading bombs on the planes and ammunition, they announced the smoking lamp was out, which meant that you couldn't smoke. And if you got smoke, you wind up with a dishonorable discharge. I mean, there was a lot of discipline. I see guys would scrub. They had these ladders going up to the different compartments. They'd have to scrub them with a toothbrush if they did something that the chief didn't like, or that the officer in charge didn't like. We had some very strange people on that ship. I remember waiting for the ship in Boston. We had an officer in charge of the V3 division who would go out and play baseball with himself out on the. We could look at him through the windows of the Fargo building, not the playground. I mean, it's like a parking lot area. And whether he was doing it for exercise or not, we never could learn. And he'd make believe he hit the ball, and he'd run around these bases all by himself, and even do it in the rain sometimes. And one day, he grabbed these guys at night on the hangar deck. They would stand watch to keep their eye on the planes and make sure nobody fooled around with anything. He'd sneak up behind one of these young fellows and grab them around and say, "I'm a Jap," to get their reaction. Well, we wondered why he never got hurt doing a thing like that. But do you know he disappeared from the ship out there in the Pacific? And nothing was ever said about that. And I'll probably get in trouble for saying this, but we had to get a new photo officer. A V3 division officer. And those kind of things took care of themselves. When you got people like that did things that were not, not proper, not acceptable. They didn't put up with anything, people like that. And he was a lieutenant commander too. That's pretty good, pretty high rank. How there, I'll never know. But us seamen, we'd see things like that. But anyhow, after Bremerton, we went back out to sea, and when I got to Pearl Harbor, we had a new photo officer. And when the chief of the photo lab happened to, I guess, talk to the new photo officer and showed him some of the pictures that I had taken, and I was called down to the office, the executive officer's office, and the photo officer was there, and he wanted to know if I had taken these pictures, and I said, yes, I did. And he said, well, the chief told me that you did, and he said, I just wanted to be sure. He said, we're going to give you a grade and give you any service, any job you want, anywhere you want to go. And this was out in Pearl Harbor when this happened. I said, well, I'd like to go to I thought about it for a while, and then I said, I'd like to go to the photo school, and because I never studied aerial photography, and I said, I'd like to go to the photo school in Pensacola, Florida. 24 hours I was on my way to Florida.
And what year was that?
With a grade, pardon?
Do you remember what year that was?
43, 44, 45. Okay. Just before, about a month before the war ended. Because the ship went back out again. I was aboard when we had a couple of typhoons. But when I left the ship to come back to Pensacola, they got caught in another typhoon, and it took that flight deck, which is 73 feet off the water, and my mother sent me a picture of it. It was in the paper. It peeled the flight deck right back like that. That's how rough that Pacific can get, how big those swells can, because 73 feet is what? Twice as high as this house, I guess. and it just took that flight deck and peeled it right back. One time when we had a typhoon out there in the Pacific, they tell you all hands lay aft of the island structure. You weren't allowed topside, you weren't allowed to be even in the bow, you couldn't be anywhere like that because of that possibility. Wouldn't you know, there's a catwalk that runs under the front of the flight deck, the forward part of the flight deck. And there's 2 or 3 guys sitting there having a big thrill watching the ship come up and down, and they were killed on one of those swells because they were smashed right up against the bulkhead. They were sitting on this catwalk right up under the flight deck, way up forward there. So those kind of things, a lot of that kind of stuff happened, but just no rhyme or reason for why. I know when you're young you do crazy things, but that's a little beyond, especially when you're told what to do or what not to do, you know. But after I left the ship and went to Pensacola, I enjoyed the school very much. I had a good time flying in little yellow pearls, and then we had mapping planes we flew in and learned how to do aerial mapping and things like that. And then when I went to Bainbridge, where I was discharged, I was asked if I wanted to stay in the reserve. And if I had my druthers, I would have stayed in the reserve, but I didn't want any part of it. I wanted to go home. I said no. And the recruiters there, I think they didn't do a very good job, because if they explained a little bit more about what the reserve was, I think a lot more of us would have joined the reserve, because it's a good deal, because you can continue your service and retire, you know. But as it was, I didn't have to go back in, because that's what happened to the fellows that did join the reserve. When the Korean War broke out, they were recalled. And some of those fellows that were twice my age, they worked in Rochester in the photo section of the Rochester, and they were sent to the school first to learn combat motion picture photography. And here they were, some of them were in their 40s and 50s, who were called back into service because they were in the photo business, and they joined the reserve when they got out of the World War II. And as a result, they weren't out very long, they had to come back in. They called them all back in those days. So that's about it. The Navy gave me a lot of, was responsible for a lot of my background and being in business and so forth that I wouldn't have known, wouldn't have been able to do otherwise.
Now, when were you discharged?
First day of spring, it would be 46, wouldn't it? Yeah. In the Bainbridge, Maryland. Mm-hmm.
Now, you mentioned on your form that you worked for the military after your discharge?
Yes, I worked at Monmouth. I helped another fellow, and I set up what they call combat motion picture course. They didn't have a motion picture course at Fort Monmouth. At the enlisted department, they had a still photo course, but they didn't have a motion picture course. So we wrote the lesson plans and got the training memos together and training aids and things like that. And I was there, and he left for Florida and I was made the chief instructor, and I have a caricature downstairs that one of my students made. He used to work for the New Yorker magazine, and he made a caricature of all the guys that I had there that worked with me and worked for me, and a projectionist, and had about 6 or 7 instructors. And then I got a call from the fellow that went down to Florida asking me if I wanted to come down to be a writer and a director with the Air Force. So I said, and it was in the middle of the winter, I said, in New Jersey. I said, well, I'd like to come down and see about it. So I left, in those days it was called Idlewild, Kennedy Air, out here in New York, and in a sleet storm, in a Constellation airplane, and flew down to Orlando. That's where the 1365th Squadron was with the Air Force, was their photographic squadron. And when I left in a sleet storm and I landed in Orlando, it was just like this. White clouds, blue sky. I picked up the phone. It was in February. I picked up the phone. I called my Blanche. I said, my wife, I said, pack. We're getting out of there. And she did. 30 days later, we were gone. We were down in sunny Florida. And that lasted about lasted about 8 years, and I got out of there because I couldn't take the summers. And I, as a writer and a director down there, I was able to kind of pick and choose my assignments. And I had some real great stuff, and I used to engineer my assignments up north for the summer. We spent 2 summers in Colorado Springs. We spent a summer in back in McGuire, New Jersey. We spent another summer in Cheyenne, Wyoming, which was nice because the kids were able to see a lot of things, and I did a lot of work for the Air Force in writing films for training and documentaries and things like that. And I was the only civilian in the history of the Strategic Air Command to go on a complete OR, what they call an Operational Readiness Inspection Test. And General May set those up, I don't know when, I forgot now, but what we would do, we'd take off from Westover here. I went through the pressure chamber because I had to fly in a B-52. I had to make a 16-hour flight in a B-52, and among other things. I had to cover the Minuteman bases. It was a great job. And then I came back and I finally wound up as a audiovisual in charge of the Secretary of the Air Force at Office of Information in Washington, D.C. But our office was in Bowling Field, which was like a big parking lot because it wasn't an airfield anymore. And we lived in Northern Virginia, and I worked there until, I don't know. I bought a place up on the St. Lawrence River, and I resigned from the federal service, 6 months short of a retirement. So, which I don't resent now, but I never resented leaving the service, but I kicked myself for not spending another 6 months at least, because I went back. That's only a summer business up north on the St. Lawrence. I put an inn up there, and I went back that following winter as a consultant, but that time doesn't count toward retirement. And then, but I invented a metal sports card in 1981, so that kind of made up for it. So that's where I am now. I'm still working. In fact, got a new project for the Basketball Hall of Fame, an unlimited number of sets of Hall of Famers that I have to make. I can't make them anymore. I do most of my work in the basement here, but I've done baseball, football, basketball, Kentucky Derby, NASCAR. Then I do private stuff here in Cooperstown. I do work for the Farmers Museum, and I also do all the postcards here. It's something to do, you know. So,
did you join any veterans organizations after you?
I'm a life member of the Legion and the Foreign War.
Did you belong to the WASP?
Yes, organization. I'm also pay dues anymore in any of them. So,
how do you think your time in the service, you alluded to this a little bit, has affected your life?
Well, it gave me, my grandfather was a Princeton graduate, Princeton, the university, and he wanted me to go to Princeton. And I was all set I would have been all set to go, but the war started. And I didn't want to be drafted because I was in good health. I mean, there wasn't any reason why I wouldn't be drafted, because I was not in college in 1942. I didn't graduate till 1942. And I was the youngest in my class. I was 16 years old when I graduated. So I got a job right away, driving an oil tanker. And then I got a job working on the Belmead Army Depot for a master mechanic that my father knew there. And until I joined the Navy, until I was able to join the Navy, because I didn't want to go in the Army or the Marines or anything like that. And and I always liked photography, and as I told you, I had a little photo business going in school. Not much, but I mean, it was enough to make me acquainted. I did my own processing and everything, so I got some background there. Then I got some real good education in the Navy, which really, my motion picture work in the Navy gave me the resume I needed to qualify as an instructor and at the Army school in Fort Monmouth. So really, the Navy gave me an education that by doing. I mean, I didn't go to school, but I did it. And I guess you call it learning the hard way, I don't know. But if it wasn't for that, I don't know what I'd be doing, really. Because what I do now, these metal cards that I make, I use a sensitized metal, just like a piece of film, and I do 24 up on a sheet, and then we cut them apart with a common cut, but before that they're sealed in a chemical solution in a boiling temperature, which seals that image virtually, and it's virtually indestructible, unless you purposely, scrape it or something. But you can leave it in the sun, and it's the same process they use for signs that you find in outdoor zoos and museums and things like that, because they don't deteriorate. The sun doesn't bother the image or anything. And I can put photographs on there and anything like that. And how I got acquainted with that was, again, when I was doing the editing work, I did some tape editing for in those days it was called Health, Education, and Welfare. I guess it's Health and Human Services now, right, in Maryland. There was a fellow that had this business of making plaques for the service for different agencies in Washington, D.C. And when I was doing that photo editing or that tape editing, doctors would give these conferences, and then everything would be taped, and then we'd have to edit the tape, and because a lot of the stuff they talked about didn't pertain to the subject. And he was making these plaques, and I had a little office there in Annandale, Virginia, and I used to work once in a while. I'd go down in the evening and help him out to make these plaques. And then I got tired of commuting from Cooperstown to Annandale, Virginia every week. So I was laying in bed one night thinking about that, and I said, geez, well, these kids are spending all their money on these cardboard cards. Wouldn't it be nice if I could use that same process for metal cards? And I approached the Hall of Fame over here about it, and he said, well, can you make a prototype? And I said, I think so. So it took me about 2 weeks to get it together, because I had to combine a photo image with a line copy, and so which meant I had to have a composite negative, or I had to do a double burn, and that took too much time. But I made a prototype of Babe Ruth, and they got some kid in the high school here to write a story about it, and they put it in the Sports Collector's Digest, and we sold over 1,600 sets just from that one little story in the digest. So they went ahead and they ordered about 200 Hall of Famers at the time, and I did 9 at a time. And another fellow and I had somebody help me. And I had a lab downtown then, in a building I have down there. And now I have the lab in the basement here. And we just rent that out down there. But that's quite a business. It's good business.
Now, you got some photographs you want to do?
Yeah, there's a lot here, but maybe you want to shut that thing off. And then, incidentally, here's a picture of John Roosevelt. Well, I don't think you can see.
Yeah, I can zoom right in on it.
Zoom in on that.
He's the tall fellow, right? John is right here. That's a big cake that was made. I don't know whether it was his birthday or what. They made a big thing over it because he was the president's son.
Okay.
Got it?
Yep. Do you want to pick out some other photographs? I'll just shut the camera down for a minute.
Yeah.
All right, wait. Okay, go ahead.
All right, here's a picture of Dan, right here.
Now, when was that taken?
That was taken aboard ship probably 1943 or 4.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Here's Dan in front of an F-6F on the flight deck.
Okay.
Now here's a plane that we hit, and right after we hit it, I took another picture, and this picture has been in many publications.
You said this was from the fantail.
This is from the fantail. This is on the 18th of March, 1945. It's a Jap Judy, burst into flame and trails long plumes of smoke and flame. At 08:30 in the morning, that was attack off the coast of Kyushu, Japan. Seconds earlier, this same plane had dropped a bomb for a near miss on the USS Hornet.
Okay.
And sometimes I've noticed that the credit for this photo is given to the Hornet, but it was actually shot on the fantail of the USS Wasp. This is another plane we splashed. It was shot down off the coast of Kyushu, Japan.
Okay.
When we went to attack the Jap fleet, as I said, the fleet was further away than they had anticipated, and a lot of the planes ran out of gas. They ditched, and some of them landed on some of them finally got back and landed on the first ship they could find because they didn't have enough fuel to look around for their own ship. This is one that hit the deck. This plane was a Yorktown plane burning on the Wasp flight deck, an F-6F number 53, and the pilot is Lieutenant M.C.L.E.R.O.Y. McLeroy.
Okay.
This is just a typical barrier crash that happened almost daily. And the planes were pushed over the side.
Okay.
Because they'd just taken up room otherwise. It's one of our skippers. I think this was Captain Sprague. This is the flag. The Japanese flags indicate the number of planes shot down, and of course the the ships here are the number of ships sunk by the USS Wasp. Got it?
Yep.
This is a bomb. This picture is of a Jap plane and its bomb exploding in the water just off the port bow of the USS Hornet. The action was 60 miles off the coast of Kyushu, Japan.
Okay.
Got it? This is another Yorktown plane burning on the flight deck, F-6F. A lot of the planes that we sent out to bomb Japan, the guys would write things on the bombs before they loaded them on the ship.
Okay.
One says destination Tokyo, and when you can read this, it's too late, all that kind of stuff, you know.
Okay.
Now, we were hit off of Okinawa in a 500-pound bomb, and it exploded in the galley. Killed a great number of sailors down there, and also in the engine room. And this picture shows part of the galley damaged. You can see the. Can you get on that? All right.
Yep. Got it.
Those big pots there are big soup pots and things that were blown apart in the explosion. There's quite a few more of those pictures, but I don't think you have to see those. This shows some of the areas that we traveled, going from San Diego and
Okay.
that's about it. So, you know, I get pictures. We also went to San Francisco. We went under the bridge. I got some good pictures of the Bay Bridge, Alcatraz, things like that, but that's doesn't really pertain to anything.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Okay, you got it?
Okay, yes.
You're running out of tape, I bet you.
Just about. Thanks.
Okay.